All right, Shalom. First and foremost, I'd like to give all praises, honor, glory, and worship to Yahweh Bashim Yahushua Bashim Kakodash. Step honor to the elders and the apostles of Great Millstone. Salutations to you, Akim. This is Jaiquad from Great Millstone, Atlanta, with a lesson and a deeper look into of Genesis, the third chapter and the 15th verse, understanding the verbiage thereof and the parabolic notions that the Lord has granted us. Uh, so this is Genesis chapter 3, verse 15. It says, "And I will put enmity between thee and the woman." All right. First of all, we have to understand what the term enmity means. All right, which is ayabah in the Hebrew, which is hatred. Okay. All right. And thee and the woman. Now, who is the thee? The thee, when you read up, is talking about the serpent. But who is the serpent today? The serpent is Esau Edom. All right. Which is the so-called white race. All right. It says thee and the woman. Now, who is the woman talking about? The woman is talking about the nation of Israel. All right. So, firstly, let's prove uh, that there's in let's prove that there's been hatred between Esau and the nation of Israel, which is Jacob, from the beginning of their conception. Um, Matter of fact, I before we even bring that out, for time's sake, I'm gonna mention that Cain and Abel was also Esau and Jacob. All right, Cain was Esau, Abel was Jacob, and what did Cain do? He slew his brother Jacob. He slew his brother Abel. All right, and because he had enmity and hatred for him. All right. Matter of fact, I'm gonna go ahead and grab a precept for that actually, in Peter's, Shalakia. Okay, excuse me, First John. This is First John chapter 3, verse 12. It says, "Not as Cain, who was of that wicked one, and slew his brother, and wherefore slew he him? Because his own works were evil, and his brother's righteous." See? And what verse 13, it says, "Marvel not, my brother, if the world hate you." All right. And why would the world hate us? Because we are of the spirit of Jacob, and the spirit of this world is of the spirit of Cain, or otherwise known as Esau, or the serpent. All right. Okay. So let's go back to Genesis chapter 3, verse 15. All right. So we understand that Cain, this is speaking of Cain and the reincarnate, likewise Esau and Jacob. Let's get that very quickly. This is Genesis chapter 25. This is Genesis chapter 25, verse 22. It says, "And the children struggled together within her, and she said, If it be so, why am I thus? And who are these children? Jacob and Esau." Right? It says, "And she went to inquire of Yahweh, and Yahweh said unto her, Two nations are in thy womb, and two manner of people." And these are two different seeds of people. All right. Two manner of people shall be separated from thy bowels. All right, they're okay, but they're twins in the womb. All right, it says, "And the one shall be stronger than the other, and the elder shall serve the younger." Right? And so these Jacob and Esau were fighting in the womb. So going back to Genesis chapter 3, verse 15. All right, it says in between thy seed. All right, it says in between thy seed and her seed. So we know it's not talking about an actual woman, because the actual woman doesn't produce seed. That's a man. Now, the woman that's been spoken of is speaking of Israel. All right, the nation of Israel, Jacob. And I have a precept for that. This is Jeremiah chapter 6, verse 2. I have likened the daughter of Zion to a comely and delicate woman. And Zion is another term to refer to the nation of Israel. All right. So he said he's likened the daughter of Zion to a comely and delicate woman. All right. So that woman is speaking of Zion, the nation of Israel. All right. So it says, it shall bruise thy head and thou shalt bruise his heel. All right. Now, what does it mean when it says it shall bruise thy head? All right. And keep in mind that who's the Lord talking to? He's talking to the serpent. So what does that mean, bruise thy head? Well, let's go to Psalms. All right. Let's go to the book of Psalms. All right. Psalms chapter 68. Psalm chapter 68, verse 21. And it reads, it says, but God shall wound the head of his enemies, and the hairy scalp of such as one as goeth on still in his trespasses. All right. Okay. So the Lord said he's going to wound the head of his enemies. So, and how's the Lord going to do that? Well, let's go to Habakkuk. And the enemy of the Lord is who? The nation of Edom. All right. The nation of Edom. So we can go to the book of Habakkuk and get further understanding and edification concerning that. This Habakkuk chapter 3, verse 11. All right, it says, the sun and moon stood still in their habitation. In the light of thine arrows they went. At the light of thine arrows they went, and at the shining of thy glittering spear, which is speaking of the missiles, all right, that are going to decimate and destroy the rulership of Esau Edom. Verse 12, it says, thou didst march through the land in indignation. Thou didst thresh the heathen in anger. Thou wentest forth for the salvation of thy people. All right. Okay. And so for the salvation of the people, the Lord went with his chariots as well as the arsenal of the missiles, pursuant to the book of Joel. Verse 13, it says, thou wentest forth for thy people's, forth for the salvation of thy people. And who is his people? The nation of Israel. Even for salvation with thine anointed, thou woundest the head of the house of the wicked. All right, and we know the scripture says the earth is given into the hand of the wicked. It's in the book of Malachi, Esau Edom is called the border of wickedness. All right, which is of course the so-called white race. All right, it says by discovering the foundation unto the neck. All right, which is basically confounding their enterprise and their thoughts and their power to exercise their thoughts. All right. All right. So let's go back to this is Genesis chapter 3, continuing in where we were in 15. It says, it shall bruise thy head. And so how the Lord and his people in the arsenal of the Lord are going to bruise the head through the chariots and the missiles. And that's going to destroy the enterprise of Esau Edom, which is the wicked. It says, and thou shalt bruise his heel. And thou, speaking of the serpent, which is Esau, it shall bruise his heel. Whose heel? The heel of Jacob, the heel of the woman. That's how you also know that the woman is not an actual woman, because it says his heel, masculine. All right. So his heel. And what is that speaking of? Well, let's go to the book of Jeremiah. All right, let's go to the book of Jeremiah quickly. It's the book of Jeremiah, chapter 30, verse 12. And it reads, it says, for thus saith Yahweh, thy bruise is incurable. Speaking of Jacob, it says, and thy wound is grievous. There's none to plead thy cause, that thou mayest be bound up. Thou hast no healing medicines, right? Because of, is no redeemer for Jacob because of our transgressions. But the Lord has given us over to our own lusts. that is what is taking place. But now is the time of redemption. All right, but this is speaking more so of a past tense setting, in currently as well. If you have not turned back to the Lord, verse 14 it says, "All thy lovers have forgotten thee; they seek thee not. For I have wounded thee with the wound of an enemy." And who is one of the lovers that Jacob had joined himself to? Esau, Edom. All right, they had joined and they had made covenants with Esau. And how do we prove that? Let's go to the book of matter of fact, I'm gonna finish this scripture out. It says with the wound of an enemy, with the chastisement of a cruel one, which is speaking of Esau. It says, "For the multitude of thine iniquity," that's why, "because thy sins were increased." All right. So let's get who was one of the lovers of Jacob. Okay. During the medieval period, you had the Arabs in Spain and in Western Europe with the Moors. They had joined themselves to each other. Jacob had joined themselves to Ishmael, but Ishmael had contributed to putting Jacob in slavery. But before then, you had Jacob, all right, during the Hasmonean dynasty, they had joined themselves to the Romans, okay? They had joined themselves to the Romans, or we joined ourselves to the Romans. We made covenants with them, but the scripture, the law tells us, "Thou shalt not make a covenant with the heathen." All right. So this is First Maccabees chapter 8, verse 29. It says, "According to these articles, did the Romans make a covenant with the people of the Jews?" Right, but only for 100, roughly about 200 years later, or I know we could start 100 years later. The Hasmonean dynasty was killed and basically wiped out by the Romans. That royal dynasty lineage was all killed. All right, led by Herod, who was a representative of the Romans. And fast forwarding a couple of more years, fast forwarding about 100 more years, all right, you had the siege of Jerusalem of 70 A.D., where the temple and Jerusalem as a kingdom was destroyed. Judea as a kingdom was destroyed. All right, so that's concerning Genesis 3 and 15. That is the breakdown concerning those different parabolic verbiage and whatnot. Of course, we understand the precept upon precept, line upon line. Lord willing, this is edifying. Shalom.